Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Play the cartels. Play the cartels. Yasodanandana Brajajanandana Yasodanandana Brajajanandana Yamuna Tiravana Yadi Tiravana Yamuna Tiravana Yadi Natiravana Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jasodanandana Brajajanandana Yasodanandana Brajajanandana Nandana Brajajanandana Yamuna Tiravana Jadi Natiravana Yamuna Tiravana Jadi Natiravana Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Radha Madhava Kunjabi Jayo Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivajagacharya Astatarasatasi Simad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada or Premanandi. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. I think I'll do this morning what I did yesterday morning, which is give a little background, because there's probably some persons here that would appreciate the background or the context of. This is a section from Uddhava Gita. Uddhava Gita is found in the 11th canto, Srimad Bhagavatam. It starts with chapter 7 and it runs nearly to the end of this canto, some 14, 15 chapters. And it's quite similar, yet different. Similar to Bhagavad Gita in many ways. Here's a couple of the ways. The person in the painting, beside Krishna at his feet, that's Uddhava. And Uddhava is Krishna's cousin, just like Arjuna is Krishna's cousin. Arjuna's mother is Kunti. And Kunti is the sister of Vasudeva, so they're cousins. And Uddhava's father is Devabhaga, who is Vasudeva's brother, so they're cousins. So there's one similarity. And another similarity is they're very intimate friends. As Arjuna is a very intimate friend, we could say Uddhava is even more intimate in friendship. In this sense, at least, that he was the constant companion with Krishna, whereas Arjuna was sometimes with and sometimes not with Krishna. Uddhava was the constant companion of Krishna. He was with Krishna, and as soon as Krishna went to Mathura, he was there. When Krishna left Mathura to go to Dwarka, he was there. The whole time, the majority of Krishna's pastimes were spent in Dwarka. Uddhava was with him at all times. He even looked like Krishna, as you see. His complexion was like Krishna. He often wore clothes that looked like Krishna, ornaments like Krishna. He was mistaken to be Krishna by the gopis when he went to visit Vrindavan. Very special person, Uddhava. It's said that outside of Vrindavan, the most intimate devotee of Krishna is Uddhava. A very special person. And the scene that you see painted here, it's in Dwarka. Going back, the Uddhava Gita starts with chapter 6. We'll go back to chapters 3 and 4, or 4 and 5. Chapters 4 and 5 is also in Dwarka. And the scene in 4 and 5 is Narada is in Dwarka. And Vasudeva invites Narada to his home. So he comes. And they have this nice discussion about transcendental knowledge. Because Vasudeva says, I was so much interested in topics about Krishna as my son, but now is the time to inquire from you about the absolute truth, transcendental knowledge. So he asks many questions, and Narada gives many answers, and it's a really spectacular section. So 5 ends, they're in Dwarka. The scene is Dwarka. Chapter 6 begins in Dwarka. Vasudeva arranges a festival, a yajna, at his home and invites the brahmanas, and it's a big event. And after the event, the brahmanas retire from Vasudeva's home. They go to a nearby place, a sacred place, to associate with one another and do what brahmanas do when they get together. And the young boys, Krishna's sons and the Dwarka young boys, they went to make fun of the brahmanas. It was a big mistake. They offended the brahmanas. The offense was one of Krishna's sons named Samba dressed up like a lady, wearing a sari, covering his head as if he was a very shy lady, and put a lump of iron under his sari. And the other boys said, this lady is really shy, but she wants to know from you brahmanas, will the child that she's bearing be a boy or a girl? And the brahmanas knew it was just, they were playing pranks, making fun of the brahmanas. So they said that lump of iron under Samba's sari will be the destruction of the Ayodhya dynasty. And it was very serious sound vibration. And the boys panicked. And immediately the boys went to the king of Dwarka. Ugrasena heard. He consulted his ministers. The decision was, grind that lump of iron into powder and throw it into the sea. And so that's what was done. Except one piece of the iron wouldn't grind no matter what, so they threw that into the sea also. A fish swallowed that lump of iron that wouldn't grind. A fisherman caught the fish. A hunter purchased the fish when he opened the fish, he saw this lump of iron. He thought, fantastic, I'll use this lump of iron to make a point for one of my arrows. And it was that point of arrow that pierced the heel of Krishna that was resulted of Krishna's departure. Although it's kind of obvious you don't die from a heel wound. But that's how Krishna departed. And the Ayodhya dynasty departed by the water, the ground up powder of that iron lump washed to the shore of Prabhas, which is a sacred place. And it gathered around the reeds, and it made the reeds like iron rods by the shore of the ocean. That's in the beginning of 6. And then right after that, the next scene is the demigods come to visit Krishna in Dwarka, in a secluded place, and they offer prayers to Krishna. And then they say to Krishna, you kept your word, you fulfilled your promise to deliver the earth from the burden of demoniac kings. It's now the task has been fulfilled. If you so desire, you may return to your eternal abode. And they left. I mean, there's lots of details in between. After they left, the next thing that happens is Krishna's alone, and he's contemplating what's next. So he considers the stage is set for the Yadu dynasty to be removed from the earth, which was part of his plan, by the way, because business is over. Just before going back to Dwarka, he had been in Vrindavan, and he made for 2 months, and he arranged for the residents of Vrindavan to return to their eternal abode, and the demigods who were fulfilling functions in Vrindavan, they went back to their demigod locations, and the whole shop closed up in Vrindavan. Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan were finished. Now pastimes in Dwarka were about to be finished. So Krishna considered, my pastimes here are finished. There's only one thing I want to do. I want to instruct Uddhava in detail so that A and B. A, he can go to the associates of Narayan Rishi in Badrinath, because I didn't get to go there, and he can carry my message to them, give my association through him. And the other was Uddhava could travel throughout the land and give Krishna's message to everyone and all, kind of like leaving Hanuman behind to deliver Ram's message, something like that. And then chapter 6 closes with Uddhava coming to see Krishna, as we see, falling at his feet, feeling really terrible, because he knows Krishna is going to leave. He just knows Krishna so well. He knows Krishna is going to leave. Krishna didn't say anything, but he knows. So he appeals to Krishna, please take me with you. And then he appeals to Krishna to please give me the means by which I can overcome my attachment to the temporary, because that's an obstacle for knowing you. I'm too much attached to enjoying life in the temporary realm, family life, etc., 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 too much attached. And so it's an obstacle, an impediment in understanding you and consciousness being with you always. So kindly give me the means by which that can be removed. And that's the end of chapter 6. And then 7, 8, 9, and almost all of chapter 10 is response to that question. In short, Krishna answers Uddhava's question. Uddhava says, I don't get it. Krishna goes on by saying, here's how you can get it. He didn't say it like that, but he said, I'll give you an instruction that our ancestor King Yadu heard from an Avadhuta Brahmin about detachment. So one day, while King Yadu was touring in his kingdom, he saw an Avadhuta Brahmin, and he was very surprised, and he approached him and said, how did you get like this? You're young, you're very handsome, you're obviously intelligent, but you're like so detached from everything. Please tell me, how did that happen? And the Avadhuta Brahmin says, I learned many lessons from 24 gurus. That it turns out that Avadhuta Brahmin is Dattatreya. It's described in Canto 2, Chapter 7, is Dattatreya. And he instructs King Yadu through the 24 gurus include the wind, the sky, mountains, the earth, water, the oceans, birds, bees, things of nature. And then sometimes it's people, it's a girl with bracelets, it's a prostitute named Pingala. It's practically a whole chapter about Pingala. That's one of his gurus. He learned something from her. And so forth. 24. There's that's 3 chapters. And the theme through those 3 chapters is knowledge and detachment so that one can perceive transcendence. Because the converse is attachment to the temporary it obfuscates, it blocks perception of and being connected with transcendence. So one has to let go of that. And so the Avadhuta Brahmin tells King Yadu how he became detached from the temporary. And as a result, how he can be connected to transcendence. And that ends chapter 9, 7, 8, 9. 10 begins just Krishna speaking with Uddhava, and he is explaining how to get to that stage that the Avadhuta Brahmana got to. Attached to transcendence by detachment from the temporary. It's 4 chapters on this one theme, which means this is important. This is Uddhava Gita, and it's so far 4 chapters on one theme. And there's variations on the theme, but it's the same theme. So we just completed a section where it's Bhagavad Gita chapter 2, kind of, where there's spirit and there's matter, and we belong to the category of spirit, and attachment to matter leaves one bewildered, and so forth. So don't be attached to matter because you get bewildered. If you want to have clarity, you have to be attached to not to the temporary, and then the door opens the door for transcendence. You can then properly contemplate on transcendence if there's detachment from the temporary. Detachment means trying to be the enjoyer of. Because Uddhava is a householder. Uddhava is not an Avadhuta Brahmin. Uddhava is a householder Kshatriya. It's not, Krishna is not advocating to Arjuna, nor is he advocating to Uddhava. Just become like that Avadhuta Brahmin, become a complete recluse in society, and then you'll be fine. He doesn't say that. But he's teaching the principle. Seeing the temporary, seeing the eternal, be attached to the eternal. Then the last section we completed was, and it's going to continue because we didn't finish yesterday. Text 30 speaks about, and even if you are do religious activity, good karma, worship the devas, do the rituals, do austerities and penances, and ascend to the heavenly planets, it says the same thing. You stay there and you try to be an enjoyer until your pious activities are exhausted, and then you fall back into the material world, and it's just the Ferris wheel. And you're just going for a ride on the Ferris wheel. So don't contemplate happiness in those terms. So that's where we end it. That's the background. And now I'm going to go to, because I didn't bring the printed subject with me, we're going to you get to see. Here's the verse. Whoops. What's going on? There we go. Okay. There's text 30. I hope you can see it. At least I can see it. This is Krishna to Uddhava. In all the planetary systems, from the heavenly to the hellish, and for all the great demigods who live for 1,000 yuga cycles. 1,000 yuga cycles is a day of Brahma. Right? 1,000 yuga cycles. There is fear of me in my form of time, because time destroys. Even Brahma, who possesses the supreme lifespan of 100,000 million billion, 311 trillion, and 40 billion years, solar years, by our calculation, is also afraid of me. So that's a big number. How do you get that number? One complete yoga cycle, 4,320,000 years. That's a long time. And the night is of equal duration, so it's times 2. That's 1 day and 1 night. And then times 30 makes 1 month. Times 12 makes 1 year. Times 100 makes 1 lifetime. So that's how that number comes from. And now, this verse is cited in Bhagavad Sandarbha by Jiva Goswami. Bhagavad Sandarbha, for those of you who are not familiar, Jiva Goswami was one of the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan. He was the nephew of Rupa and Sanatan. That means they had a third brother. Rupa and Sanatan had a brother named Anupam, and Anupam died when Jiva was just a young boy, so they took him on as like their son. Oh, he's their nephew. And he was super scholar, without elaborating. So under the guidance of Rupa Goswami and under the guidance of Gopal Bhatta Goswami, he compiled this Sandarbhas. Sandarbhas is a Sanskrit term. It's a particular type of writing without the detail. So he wrote a book on how to write a Sandarbha, as long as writing a Sandarbha. He wrote a book on how to write a Champu, as well as writing a Champu. It's like very scholarly. So this Sandarbhas, is Sat Sandarbhas, there are 6, and one of the 6 is Bhagavad Sandarbha. It's explaining the concept of, or the tattva of, Bhagavan. Bhagavat tattva explained in Bhagavad Sandarbha. So we're on Anucheda 78, and he makes reference to this verse in this Anucheda. Starts with Padma Purana. The Vaikuntha planets and the liberated devotees who reside there are described in Padma Purana. Uttarakhanda, quote, countless bliss, spiritual planets, it should be blissful, I think. Spiritual planets are in the spiritual sky, which is 3/4 of the entire creation. Tripad Vibhuti. All the spiritual planets are eternal, changeless, and free from the abominable material mode of passion. They are pure, and they have a golden effulgence, bright as millions of suns. All these transcendental planets are all filled with Vedic knowledge and free from lust, anger, and other vices. On these planets reside great devotees, whose only joy is the pure devotional service of Lord Narayana's lotus feet. This looks like the same verse that we read yesterday, but it's a different translation of what we read yesterday. I think that's what it is. In these verses, the word Tripad Vibhuti indicates the spiritual world. beyond the material universes, and the word pada vibhuti indicates the material universes. So 3/4, 1/4. This is described in Padma Purana Uttarakhanda. The eternal spiritual world is 3/4 of existence, whereas the temporary material world is only 1/4 of existence. The Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is also quoting Padma Purana. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose form is eternal, auspicious, transcendental, infallible, delightful, and always youthful, resides in that supreme abode, accompanied by his potencies. Ishwara Devi, Shri Devi, and Bhumi Devi. The Vaikuntha planets and the material world are both described in Srimad Bhagavatam 2.6.18. Translation. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the controller of immortality and fearlessness, and he is the transcendental. He is transcendental to death and fruitive actions of the material world. O Narada, O Brahmana, it is therefore difficult to measure the glories of the Supreme Person. This verse from Srimad Bhagavatam directly mentions the Lord's immortality and fearlessness, and the Lord's position of being always liberated from material influence is implied, although not directly stated, and the other two qualities are only implied in the following statement this is from Shvetashvatara Upanishad, Shruti Shastra. Quote, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the original master of all immortality. So there it's explicit. The passage of Srimad Bhagavatam, that's 2.6, etc., describes the Lord, the possessor of these qualities, namely immortality, fearlessness, and liberation, whereas the passage from Shruti Shastra describes the qualities the Lord possesses. Vaikuntha Loka's immortality is hinted in the following. There's a whole section here, 2.9, you'll see. This Canto 2, Chapter 9, for those of you that like to get like kind of the big picture of things within Srimad Bhagavatam. It's the chapter where the 4 essential verses of the Bhagavatam are presented. What does that mean, the 4 essential verses? Called the Chatur Shloki. Vishnu speaks to Brahma 4 verses that are the essence of the whole Bhagavatam, and the Bhagavatam is an expansion of those 4 verses. And the chapter 9 is the chapter where those come, and the beginning of the chapter is pre-creation. That is, Brahma is born from the body of Mahavishnu, or Garbhodakshay Vishnu. He becomes self-inquiring. He does austerity, and in the course of those austerities, in the ocean of darkness, all of a sudden, he has this vision. Lord Vishnu appears before him in the spiritual world. Voila. And he comes before Lord Vishnu, and they have some exchanges. And Vishnu says, take any big benediction that you like. So he asks for a few of them. He's very smart. One of them he asked for is, when I do this creation, please let me not fall prey to false ego, thinking I did creation. Because it's your creation and I'm just your instrument in your creation. So please let me not fall prey to false ego, thinking I did it. And then he asks him 4 questions, which he gets 4 answers, and those 4 answers are the Chatur Shloki verses. That's the context. So he's going to run through some of them from chapter 9. So what is Vaikuntha anyway? Here's a description. Vaikuntha's immortality is hinted in these words of Srimad Bhagavatam 2.9.9. Vaikuntha is adored by all self-realized persons freed from all kinds of miseries and fear of illusory existence. Vaikuntha's blissfulness is hinted in these words of same verse. Vaikuntha is the supreme planet above all others. That the Vaikuntha Loka is eternal is also described Padma Purana. The residence of Lord Vishnu is eternal. Back to Canto 2, Chapter 9. That the Vaikuntha planets are completely free from all fear is hinted by the following verse. In the personal abode of the Lord, there is no predominance of the influence of time, because time creates fear, because time destroys things. We discussed this in the class yesterday morning. Fear is that which is temporary, which I identify with as an object of enjoyment or as me. Time is going to destroy, so there's fear. Fear of death, but fear of loss of something that you value. Time destroys it. Guaranteed. But in Vaikuntha, there's no fear because there's no influence of time. That's why it's Vaikuntha. There's no anxiety. You're not going to lose something because there's no influence of time. The kind of time that we know that destroys things. This is also confirmed in the following statements of the Bhagavatam 12:11-19. O Brahmanas, the transcendental abode of the Lord is always free of all fear. Back to second canto. That the abode of the Supreme Lord is auspicious is hinted. Verse 10 from this chapter. The illusory external energy Maya cannot enter the personal abode of the Lord. So that's auspicious. Because it is completely free from the material modes which turn one from the Lord, Vaikuntha Loka should be understood as a great reservoir of auspiciousness, a pure devotional service to the Lord. Then from Naradiya Purana, that devotional service is the abode of all auspiciousness is confirmed by the Supreme Personality of God Himself in the following words. Naradiya Purana, O best of the Brahmanas, I grant to you unwavering pure devotional service unto me. This devotional service is full of perfect transcendental bliss and is the reservoir of all auspiciousness. Next, that the abode of the Lord is always liberated from material contact is confirmed. This is a later section of Uddhava Gita, this 11:20-37. Krishna says, my pure devotees attain liberation from matter by entering my transcendental abode. So no influence of the modes of nature there. Then, this morning's verse is quoted. Taking shelter of secondary meanings of the word Amrita and Bhaya, one may interpret them to mean Janaloka and the other material planetary systems, because they last for a long time. So that kind of Amrita. They're higher than heaven, so maybe they're also perpetual. This labored misinterpretation is refuted by the use of the word martyam, or dying, which clearly indicates that these two words should be interpreted according to their primary meanings. This word martyam is explained by the Supreme Personality of Godhead Himself in the following words of this morning's verse. This is the last. Even Brahma, who possesses the supreme lifespan of 3,040,000,000,000 years, is also afraid of me. And Janaloka is below that. It lasts less, the duration of life is less there than in Brahmaloka. So anyway, the summary of text 30. Don't think there's happiness to be found in heaven, because whatever it is, it's temporary. Now you see it, poof, now you don't. So it's asat, or temporary. We discussed this kind of at length yesterday. It appears to be substantial. By the way, that's one of the it's one of the 4 Chatushloki verses of the Bhagavatam. What's that? One of them says, that which you see to have value existing separate from the Supreme Lord, know that to be my illusory energy Maya. Really clean definition. It looks like, but it's not. And that it looks like is Maya, but it's not. And the reality is it's not. Now, we know what happiness and distress are. And we certainly know what distress is. And, happiness looks like, it feels good. Things are good. And then something happens. And then the good, so the heaven is just a longer version, another version. And Janaloka and even Brahmaloka is another version. It's asat. It's where the influence of time destroys things. Even that which feels or seems to be good. The fruits of piety are destroyed with time. Everything is destroyed with time. So you have to get to that place that's timeless. That's the message. Those persons that are thoughtful and want, what real happiness is, means happiness that doesn't end, not happiness that comes and it goes. Because when it goes, then it's not happiness anymore. It's, what? Distress or anxiety. It's going to become distressful. What happens if something? So that's text 30. And now we're going to move on to text 31. This is Krishna continuing to speak to Uddhava in response to this one question: how to overcome attachment to the temporary because it blocks my understanding of you. The material senses create material activities, either pious or sinful, and the modes of nature set the material senses into motion. The living entity, being fully engaged by the material senses and modes of nature, experiences the various results of fruitive work. Now, just an explanation. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta, and he was also highly scholarly, and he made a translation that's a little bit different than the one we just read. This is BBT translation. So we're going to read Bhaktisiddhanta's translation, his commentary, and his summary of Vishwanath's commentary, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. So you're going to hear the same message a few times with a kind of slightly different presentation, but it's the same message. So here's Bhaktisiddhanta's translation. It is the material senses that perform pious and sinful activities. It is the 3 modes of material nature that inspire the senses to engage in fruitive activities, and it is the living entity who enjoys the fruits of his karma with the help of his senses. This is Sankhya philosophy. BBT purport reads, it has been explained in the previous verses that the living entity is under the control of fruitive activities. The living entity under the control of fruitive activities is pushed down into a hellish condition of life. In this verse, the exact nature of the living entity's dependence on fruitive activities is described. One can observe that one's activities are performed by the material senses, and that the living entity himself is merely conscious of such activities. One may be worshipping the demigods, enjoying sex, or performing agriculture or intellectual activities, but in all cases, the material senses are performing the work. Paragraph. One may argue that the spirit soul initiates the activities of the senses and thus the ultimate doer. But such false egotism is negated in this verse by the statement guna srijanti karmani guna nusrajanti gunan. The three modes of nature, goodness, passion, ignorance, stimulate the functions of the material senses, and the living entity coming under the control of a particular mode of nature merely experiences the good and bad results of his work. This does not negate the concept of free will, since the living entity chooses to associate with different modes of nature by one's eating, speaking, sexual activities, occupation, etc., one associates with various modes of nature and acquires a particular mentality. But in all cases, the modes of nature themselves are acting, not the living entity. Sankhya philosophy. The word asau in this verse indicates that the same as Krishna teaches in Bhagavad Gita, right? Yes. He says, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 39, so far I've described Sankhya. Now I'm going to describe Buddhi. So Krishna is describing Sankhya. And it's a little more comprehensive than what Krishna describes to Arjuna. It's just like this is the graduate study of the undergraduate study. It's not a different message, it's just a little more comprehensive. The word asau in this verse indicates that the living entity falsely considers himself to be the performer of work carried out by nature. Guess what? Krishna says the same thing in Bhagavad Gita. Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashaha ahankar vimudhatma kartaham iti manyate. The bewildered spirit soul, under the influence of the three modes of material nature, thinks himself to be the doer of activities which are in actuality carried out by nature. Same message. The conditioned soul can be liberated simply by giving up this false egoistic conception of life and taking to the devotional service of the Lord, by which the living entity or the marginal potency of the Supreme Lord escapes the disturbing influence of the external potency called Maya. In the devotional service of the Lord, the liberated entity realizes his actual form of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. And last paragraph. It is natural to perform activities with a desire to achieve a good result. The best results, however, can be attained by one who engages in the devotional service of the Lord with a desire to be reinstated in his constitutional position as the Lord's loving servant. In this way, the tendency to exploit one's own activities for a particular result can be purified. Then, the modes of nature and the material senses will no longer engage the living entity in illusion. The living entity is by nature blissful. And when his illusion ceases, all suffering comes to an end. The liberated soul is then fit to reside in Vaikuntha, the kingdom of God. You get on this train, and the train has a destination. The destination is Vaikuntha, meaning no anxiety. But to get to that place of no anxiety, the influence of time has to be absent, because time will destroy things. And then there's anxiety. So how do you get to timelessness? By connecting with the timeless. And his whole abode is timeless, and the living entities that reside there are timeless. They have no material activities, they have no material modes of nature, they have no material bodies. They have bodies, they have senses, but no modes of nature, no time, none of those things that are come and go and destroyed. There is another realm, and we're being invited by Krishna. Let's go. Here's Bhakti Siddhanta's, you could say, gloss of Vishwanath Chakravarti. Here's his purport. different than the BBT one, but similar. According to the Bhagavad Gita, one's activities are impelled by the three modes of material nature. As long as one thinks himself to be the doer of activities, he remains on the platform of false ego. Until one comes to the platform of self-realization, he continues to experience lamentation and illusion. The conditioned soul can be liberated if he gives up his separatist mentality and engages in the devotional service of the Lord. Now, separatist is kind of like not a nice word these days. It has pejorative connotations to it. So what does it mean? In Sankhya philosophy, what does it mean? In Kapila Dev is the teacher of Sankhya philosophy, and he uses the Sanskrit term isn't separatist. It's bhina drik. Bhina means separate. Drik means to see. He sees things separate. That's Maya. What's separate from the source of emanation? Nothing. Seeing things separate from the source of emanation, that's the separatist. And the modes of nature facilitate the separatist, the one that wants to be the enjoyer of Krishna's property. That's the separatist. So it's not the conventional use of separatist term, but it's a Sankhya use of that word separatist. The conditioned soul can be liberated if he gives up his separatist mentality and engages in the devotional service of the Lord. That is to see things not separate, but connected to. And once you see things connected to, you utilize them in alignment with their source. Really simple, quite simple. In principle, it's quite simple. The difficulty is we're attached to being the enjoyers of that which we're not meant to be the enjoyers of. Somebody else's property. Whose property? Krishna's. That's the separatist mentality. So one can let go of that. This is the philosophical underpinnings of letting go. The previous chapters, and now it's Sankhya, it's putting it into practice. Like our acharyas say, Krishna is going to, in this chapter 10, explain how to get to that place that the Avadhuta Brahman was, like not attached. When this whole chapter of the prostitute named Pingala is described, she was a prostitute in Mithila. I mean, it wasn't during the time of King Janak, but during the time of King Yadu, there was a kingdom in Mithila, and there was a prostitute. And it says, one of the commentaries says, the Avadhuta Brahman was just wandering about here and there. He had no home or residence or anything. He took rest in the yard of this prostitute. The prostitute came out and served him, gave him something to eat, and looked after him. She did some service to a sadhu. And that's how her devotional mood awakened, by service to a sadhu. It wasn't like, he looked like a disheveled person, but she was just served him. And she got a lot of benefit. And he says he learned from her, but she got the benefit from him. So, how to become detached from the temporary so that we can become attached to the eternal. That's the message. When one is under the shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is removed from the disturbing influences of the external energy of the Lord. By the perfection of devotional service of the Lord, one realizes his original identity of eternity, knowledge, and bliss, so that he goes to reside in Vaikuntha, the eternal abode of the Lord. That's Bhaktisiddhanta's purport. And I think we'll just have I think I'm going to go to Jiva Goswami. We mentioned from Bhagavad Sandarbha. He wrote another Bhagavatam commentary that's verse by verse for the whole book. The Sandarbhas is topic by topic. Krama Sandarbha is verse by verse. Different format. And so this is Jiva Goswami commenting on this verse. His translation: material senses create material activities with results, either pious or sinful, and the modes of nature set the material senses into motion. The living entity, being fully engaged by the material senses and modes of nature, experiences the various results of action. And his commentary reads, and this is it for today's class. Bhagavatam is supported by Shruti, which says, Taittiriya Upanishad, in fear of the Lord the wind blows, the sun rises, out of fear of the Lord Agni, Indra, and death flee. And fear is that's time, the destructive feature. The Lord does not do this personally. Other controllers are rejected in 4 verses. That's, what the next upcoming verses for this chapter. The Lord inspires the actions by proximity, like a magnet. That's a very nice example, isn't it? And because we've all, since as kids, there's a magnet, there's some nails or iron filings. You don't have to touch the magnet to the iron filings. You just bring it closer and they start moving. So the Lord moves the material energy like a magnet moves things by proximity. Matter does not act on its own, or this verse, our verse this morning, negates the idea that the jiva by himself performs actions and enjoys the results by supplying the Sankhya idea. The gunas are the cause of the jiva's acting in a particular way. Same message as Bhagavad Gita, isn't it? Same message as Bhagavad Gita. It's just graduate study of the same message. The message doesn't change. But through knowledge, then there can be detachment. The problem with knowledge alone is you nod your head, say, yes, I get it, and then you start doing stuff and you forget it. Knowledge gets washed away by the modes of nature and our vasanas, our tendencies for being absorbed and being enjoyers. Long-standing, the word that's been used here is mentality. We just get carried away. We understand. We go, yes, now I'm clear. And in less than a moment, we're not clear anymore. By involving the senses in objects, something happens. It's like a bungee cord. You stretch it, okay, and then you let go, and whoop. That's our conditioning. So how do you get beyond conditioning? Knowledge is essential, but knowledge alone is not enough. So what's enough? Awakening the dormant consciousness of shelter taking in the Supreme Lord. But there's an obstacle, and that's ignorance. The ignorance has to be removed. That's what's going on in these 4 chapters. How does this whole thing work? How do I get stuck when I really don't want to be stuck? Because we're attached to being in the enjoyers. And here's the methodology. Here's how Maya does her thing. And there's different moving parts to the machine. The senses, the modes of nature, the objects, the living entity thinking, I'm the doer. And it just happens again and again. That's the machine. Yantra, Rudhani Mayaya. Yantra is a machine. We're moving on the machine made of the material energy, and we think we're doing stuff when it's the modes of nature and the senses doing stuff. Modes of nature means material nature. Prakriti. Prakriti moves by the modes, and it's Prakriti does stuff. And we're thinking we're the doer. We're experiencing the results of activity, but we're not the creator of the activity. Prakriti is the creator of the activity. And Prakriti is under the direction of the three modes. And the three modes are under the direction of Krishna. Maya Dyakshena Prakriti. And that's the real picture. And if we don't get the real picture, we'll just get, in the bungee cord program. Okay, so I want to go to the image. We'll get back. There's a nice painting. Watch the curtain open. It's really nice. Whoops. There we go. That designer made it like this. Okay, here's there's a teenage girl that made some very nice illustrations to depict the message of the whole Uddhava Gita. And this is obviously a painting of Krishna and Arjuna. And we're going to cover Arjuna's face in a moment, but here's the text. It is natural to perform activities with a desire to achieve a good result. The best results, however, can be attained by one who engages in the devotional service of the Lord with a desire to be reinstated in his constitutional position as the Lord's loving servant. In this way, the tendency to exploit one's own activities for a particular result can be purified. Then the modes of nature and the material senses were no longer engaged, a living entity, in illusion. They will engage in activity, but not activities of illusion. Now, it sounds nice. Does it work? Is it false advertising? What about if it's not working for me? Is it something wrong with the philosophy? Something wrong with the teaching? Or is there something wrong with how I'm applying myself to the teaching? Or I'm applying myself rightly, but I'm really covered, so it's going to take some time. I have to be patient and perseverant and determined and continue faithfully following, and then the illusion gradually subsides. It gets a little darker again, but then it gradually subsides, and it's a gradual cleansing and evolution of higher consciousness. That's the answer. If one properly follows. And properly follows, that means properly follows proper teachings. So there has to be a source of proper knowledge, and there has to be taking up that proper knowledge and applying it in meaningful ways in our lives. It's like one of the questions yesterday was, I like food. And, since I've been little, I like food. And so many years later, I still overindulge. I mean, he wasn't a chubby person, but, more than what he requires. And he knows he's taking, so what to do? So it's the application. It's not the bhakti process is not a vending machine. You go to the machine, see what you want, put in the coins in the slot, pull the lever, and down comes what you want. It's not a mechanical vending machine process. It's a devotional process. And you invest in your relationship with Krishna in a meaningful way, and gradually, on the one side, the covering subsides, and on the other side, the original consciousness is restored. Generally speaking, it's a gradual process. Like the rising of the sun, it's gradual. Bhakti process is compared like that. So let's see if there's some discussion. Sankhya is a little hard to chew sometimes. but it's important. It keeps showing up again, so must be important. See if there's some discussion. For those of you seated over here, you can't see. There's a whole wing of people over here. And those of you seated over there, you can't see, but there's a whole wing of people over here. When you speak, you can remove the mask so I can hear you better.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, that was a nice class. I liked it because not normally we used to talk about Uddhav Gita. So my question is this one. So whenever we talk of any topic like going to Vaikuntha, we talk about even here in this text I saw like when you attain mukti, you go to Vaikuntha. All the Upanishads say that, right? So my I just want to clarify, like, how is it related to devotional service when it comes to mukti? Because we reject mukti because we want devotional service is higher than mukti, so that's why we reject liberation, correct? So why does the scriptures keep saying that like when you attain liberation you go to Vaikuntha? It should say something like when you attain mukti with devotional service you should go to Vaikuntha. Or is it like this, like something like when it says you go to Vaikuntha when you attain mukti, that means devotional service is inbuilt? Yeah, that is
you should write your commentaries. Write an essay for Back to Godhead magazine or something. So here's three things. One, the fact that you've understood what you just articulated means it's in the text. Otherwise, you wouldn't understand what you just articulated. So it's there. That's one. Second is, you don't always say everything when you say something. It's implied for those that know what the big something is, but you don't always say the big something, you just say something, and it's implied. And the third is, there's some people, they don't have a concept of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They have a concept of, I want something. I'll do something to get something. It's entrepreneurial consciousness. So they're not ready yet for full surrender. They want to do something to get something. And it's understood. And therefore, sometimes things are spoken in that way purposely because there are people that want to get something for doing something. It's not the higher consciousness, but it's the consciousness of many people. Most people, even in spiritual life, to do something to get something. Not just, demigod worship, but even, beyond demigod worship, to do something to get something. It's just this pernicious, it's all about me and what I get from what I do. So it's recognizing that mentality. It's not looking the other way, but it's in acknowledgement. It's encouraging people to go back to Godhead. We're going to mention it in the evening class, by the way, this particular point. Okay. Actually, it's not. It's going to be the festival of the Holy Name. We got it mixed up.
No follow-up.
Go ahead.
See, the reason why I came across this doubt came across in my mind is when I was reading through the Bhagavatam Canto 3, Kapila Dev's section, there was this verse that talks about Sarupya Salokya, right? So in that it says Diyamanam na grinanti vina mat sevanam janaha, in that sloka where BBT has translated like we don't want
Yes.
but they miss that word. Like my question is like, when Bhagavatam says Vina Sevanam Janaha, is there some mukti, something like that, which has a sarupya, salokya without service?
Without?
Service.
No.
See, why does Bhagavatam say Vina Mat Sevana Janaha? It specifically says that. So, is there a other side, like there is a one with service?
You're asking the same question again. The question, I'll say it the third time. Is there such a thing as salokya, sarupya without seva? That's your question.
Yes.
And the answer is no. So it can be explicit or implicit, but the answer is still no.
Okay, got it.
He's a scholarly devotee. He likes to read carefully. Back there.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. So this doership that we are not the karta, the modes are working, and so then why there is a concept of heaven and hell, and those who are doing bad, they go to hell.
Why is there a concept?
Because I'm not the doer. Why should I go to hell?
Well, you didn't repeat everything. The part you didn't repeat is we experience the fruits of our activity. We're not the creator of the fruits, but we experience the fruits. Prakriti creates the activity and the fruits. We experience them. That's why there's not just a concept, there's a place for people to experience the fruits. You with me?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me, it's different, it's related but different. It's different but related. Sometime when you're dealing, because these questions come up amongst the devotees, when you're dealing with someone that doesn't have, a lot of experience in the Bhaktivedanta purports, how do you help the person understand that there's a spiritual form in the spiritual realm that's not material? Or, related, how do you help a person to understand when a Christian person, for example, when you go to heaven, how do you know you're there? How do you know when you've reached heaven? How do you know where you are right now? You have a body that has senses, and you can perceive where you are right now. So when you go to heaven, you have a body with senses that perceives you're in heaven. But you're still the perceiver. You're the soul that hasn't changed. You just have a different body. And then in the spiritual world, there's also a spiritual form, but there's no material covering. That's the teaching that says it's consciousness that's everything, and then there's different types of covering of consciousness, and the spiritual realm is there's no material covering, but there's spiritual form. I mean, it's logical, and then besides logical, it's confirmed in Scripture. But, how are you going to know that you're there? You experience it. How do you experience it? Through your senses. So how do you know? It's not a concept of heaven and hell. It's a place where there's bodies, hellish and heavenly bodies. And you experience whatever you experience, pleasure or pain, happiness or misery. But you're experiencing the fruits of your work that's been carried out by Prakriti. So it's the modes of nature that you associate with, and the choices that you make for associating with the modes of nature that's going to determine what your experiences are. Good, bad, or mixed. Or transcendental. And all of this is to have us make the right choice in the menu and consistently choose transcendence. But the whole point, just to repeat, there's obstacles for making that transcendence choice. And that's our long-standing tendency to try to be enjoyers according to the modes of nature. Really strong. And that's this reference. Here we go. It is natural to perform activities with a desire to achieve a good result. The best results, however, are to be attained, can be attained by one who engages in the devotional service of the Lord with the desire to be reinstated in his constitutional position as the Lord's loving servant. So that's the better choice. But we can say yes and then make the other choice again and again. I mean, we're conditioned souls. So it's gradually leveraging to the transcendental choice, or the relationship as the eternal servant of Krishna choice. And we do practices, sadhana practices, to help achieve that. It's like what we're doing right now, along with other things that we do in the course of the rest of the day. That's the purpose. That's bhakti, the bhakti purpose. Please Krishna, instead of it's all about me. Okay, something else in the back?
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. I just have a couple of questions. One is that when we do the devotional service, and even if we are not looking for results, but in a way we are looking for results to have the liberation, isn't that a result also?
Yes, that's a result. That's your question is his question.
Yeah.
You're just stating it differently.
Yeah. And then second thing is that, with awareness of your consciousness all the time, you can really create a heaven and hell in this world, right? You don't have to go to heaven.
That's right.
To experience heaven.
But when you quit this body, supposing it's heavenly consciousness, that's where you'll go. You don't stay in St. Louis. You go to that place where persons with heavenly consciousness go.
How do we know that this is not heaven? This is not...
Look around.
Or like
every time, and when I drive, I look out the window to see what kind of stores do people have. Like it's particularly eating places, and it's not heaven. You follow?
Right, but if your consciousness and your awareness is in the goodness, and you will only see the goodness, right? If you have that sense control that...
Your consciousness is heavenly, but the place is not. You can create in your home a heavenly atmosphere in your home. You can create in your circle of association amongst friends a heavenly association. Yes. And the world around us is not a heavenly place. Nice try.
Thank you.
Well, you as a instrument of Krishna can help create around you a spiritualized atmosphere. Yes. And that will be what your experience is. But it's not going to stop living entities from entering into your space or around your space and doing hurtful things to you and to others and to each other. So, but you can propagate divine consciousness by being in divine consciousness. And even when you experience the ugly, you're not disturbed by it. That's if you're in transcendence. You're influencing the disturbing rather than becoming disturbed. Sangha. Give her the microphone. When you see a lotus flower.
When I see a lotus flower, it just kind of gives me a different perspective when I look at lotus flower. I mean, the
Sure.
lotus flower is grown in all the mud and all the junk there, but still it is so pretty, it is so beautiful, and nothing gets stuck on it. So
Okay. When you walk out the front door, look over in the corner of the property and you'll see a very old magnolia tree. Big blossoms. Beautiful. Heavenly. Right here in St. Louis. But you'll also see some of the blossoms are wilting. And some of them are brown. And that doesn't happen in heaven. You get my point.
yeah.
Okay. So there's a question up front here. Raise your hand again.
So I have like two questions. First is kind of technical, but for Lord Brahma, he has like 311 trillion 40 billion year lifespan, but that's like from our point of
Yeah,
view.
that's our solar years, exactly.
Yeah, so but for him, isn't it only like doesn't
It's 100 years.
yeah, it's 100 years,
That's
so
it.
doesn't it not feel like long for him? Because
That's right.
yeah, it doesn't
That's
feel
right.
long.
That's correct.
Okay, so it even though it's not that long, like it's relative.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
You're exactly right. The point of the verse is that even from our perspective, he lives a long life. He has fear because the time energy is going to bring death. That's the point of the verse.
Okay. Yeah, and then
Second.
the second one, in that Avadhuta Brahman, what did he learn from Pingala?
Pingala, there are many. It's a long section, but what happened was she was waiting for her customer one night, and no one came. And and it was midnight, and then she felt really badly, and then she had this, enlightenment moment when she realized expecting sensual pleasure and expecting monetary gain was a false expectation. And she became inspired. And how she became inspired, it says in the commentary, she became inspired by the association, by the service that she did for the Avadhuta Brahman. But she came inspired, apparently she heard something about the personality of Godhead. Let me, instead of devote myself to the temporary body of some man that's, is made of these abominable substances, blah, blah, blah. Let me devote myself to the eternal form of the Supreme Lord and just be in the mood of service to, and she goes on and on and on about that's real happiness. So, no, it's not that the Avadhuta Brahman or Dattatreya doesn't know that, but he's pointing to what he learned from her to help him become detached from, the temporary. He learned that from her. And you could say she learned that from him. But that was the lesson. I mean, it's more details. It's a long section, but that's the essence of it. Expectation of happiness from these two things. Pleasure of the senses with sense objects, and the money that will come from my fruitive activities or whatever the mode of nature of those activities are. It's a false expectation for happiness. Let me not go there, she decides. Instead, let me go this other place. Service to the Supreme Person, whose form, and she goes on describing his form. That's the better place. And she becomes very dedicated, becomes very detached and very renounced. And everyone's like, wow, what happened to this lady? But, she becomes exemplary person from a very bad professional position. and he learned from her. It's one of the few sections of those 24 that it ends up explicitly in devotional service, but she's one of the ones. It's really explicit. She becomes a full-on, great devotee from a really different position. Anything else?